The Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe reached Ahmedabad with his wife for a two-day visit to much fanfare. The visit is part of the 12th India-Japan annual dialogue. However, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Abe will also launch the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and lay the foundation for India's first bullet train. The two leaders have met 10 times in the last 3 years. In fact, this will be Modi and Abe's fourth annual meeting since 2014. Prime Minister Modi broke with protocol to receive the Abes at the airport, from where they set out on a 9-kilometer road show to Mahatma Gandhi's Sabarmati Ashram. The Abes, kitted out in Indian attire, were greeted by crowds along the way and performances celebrating India's culture by local school children. Later in the evening, the two leaders visited a 16th century mosque where Prime Minister Modi personally explained the rich heritage and architecture of the structure to the Japanese Premier and his wife. Now, tomorrow, the two world leaders will hold bilateral talks and officially lay the foundation for India's first bullet train, which will run from Mumbai to Ahmedabad. The 500-kilometer project is also known as the Mumbai-Ahmedabad High-Speed Railway Corridor and is financed majorly by Japan. The train will run at a speed of 250 kilometers per hour and reduce the travel time between the two cities from the current 7 hours to approximately 2. India's first bullet train project, this is estimated to cost 1,11,000 crore rupees and is scheduled to be completed by 2023. Japan is extending a loan of 88,000 crore rupees to India for the project and will charge a minimal interest of 0.1%. India has to repay the loan in 50 years. My colleague Ramesh Ramachandran joining us live from Ahmedabad, where he's been tracking all the developments for us. Good evening, Ramesh. Give us a sense of what the atmosphere was like there when the Prime Minister of Japan arrived.
Good evening to you, Aisha. I'm coming to you from the banks of the Sabarmati River here in Ahmedabad, which, as you can see, is well lit up behind me, and all in honor of the visiting Japanese dignitary. Talking about the atmosphere and atmospherics here in Ahmedabad this afternoon when Prime Minister Abe landed, it was a festive occasion, as it were, and crowds of people had thronged at all the major squares of the city to catch a glimpse of the two leaders traveling in their motorcade on a 8 or 9 kilometer roadshow, all from the airport to the Sabarmati Ashram, which was their first official engagement of the day. And as I said, the crowds were, waited in anticipation for nearly 3 hours in the heat and dust of the city. They were pleasantly surprised to see Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe wave to the crowds. And also along every stretch of the highway, we saw students, boys and girls, young boys and girls performing cultural dances and playing and dancing to the local music to portray and highlight or showcase the local customs and traditions for the benefit of the Japanese Prime Minister and his wife.
Absolutely. So in terms of the color of the event, that was clearly a 10 on 10. But tomorrow is the business end of things for the two leaders. Ramesh, what exactly do you expect the two prime ministers to be discussing when they sit down for talks tomorrow?
Indeed, tomorrow, as you said, will be the operative day of the two-day visit by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to Ahmedabad. Remember, this is one of those rare bilateral visits, Aisha, where all the talks and meetings are happening in a city outside of national capital, New Delhi. And that should tell you something about the way the states are playing a more important role in shaping or reshaping India's foreign policy. Now, that said, tomorrow the highlight to my mind would be the groundbreaking ceremony, Aisha, of the high-speed rail corridor, which you referred to just moments ago. It'll be a first of its kind in India, and both Prime Ministers, Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi, will jointly lay the foundation stone of the high-speed rail corridor project that will link this city, Ahmedabad, with Mumbai in the adjoining state of Maharashtra. And as I said, this particular rail corridor will reduce the transit time from nearly 6 or 7 hours to cover the 500-odd kilometers to a little over 2 hours. So clearly, a lot of benefits there accruing to the people and people of the state. Also, all the areas lying along this 500-kilometer route extending from Ahmedabad to Mumbai.
Right. Also, Ramesh, the Asia-Africa Growth Project has also received a fair bit of, let's say, coverage and build-up, if you will, and more so in comparison to the Chinese One Belt and One Road initiative. But how fair is that comparison? I mean, is it apples and oranges, or does it really prove to be a legitimate counterweight, so to speak, of China's attempts to increase its sway over vast tracts of land?
Interesting question there, Aisha, but clearly when it comes to India-Japan relations, you and I know very well that China is the proverbial elephant in the room, and therefore to that extent, from that perspective, anything that China does or anything that India and Japan do should not be seen in isolation. There has to be a regional context to everything that these countries do in the region and beyond. And therefore, as you said, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor can be, in one sense of the term, seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Remember, India and Japan's relationship extends to third countries as well. And in this case, we're seeing both countries interested in forging a development partnership with the continent of Africa, where again China is playing a lead role in already increasing its footprint on the continent. So clearly, the attempts to compete with China in the area of Belt and Road Initiative cannot be dismissed or rejected out of hand. But that said, as I said, India-Japan relations, their significance lies not only in the bilateral context, but also in the regional and global context as well. And by virtue of the fact that both India and Japan have their own differences with China, be it the maritime boundary or the land boundary in the case of India. So clearly, a lot of convergences at play here between India and Japan. And I'm sure the people and the policymakers in Beijing must be closely watching the ongoing visit of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for nuance, and for the messaging, as it were, emanating out of the annual summit here in Ahmedabad.
Absolutely. Messaging definitely part of the conversation. Ramesh, one last question. You brought up the fact that China is always in the room, so to speak. And in fact, China today has issued a statement on that meeting between the two prime ministers, something that they really didn't need to do. We saw China bringing up India even when there was a visit between dignitaries of China and Nepal. Also, given the fact that Japan did come forward to support India's stance in Doklam, does that sort of add a few more ingredients to the mix, so to speak?
Absolutely. There is no denying the fact that, Aisha, Japan is probably and perhaps the only country that has come out openly in support of India's position on the standoff on the Doklam Plateau. But that said, India-Japan relations, as I said, pointed out before, Aisha, their significance lies in the wider Indo-Pacific region, especially in ensuring free sea lanes of communication, especially given India and Japan's position in the South China Sea on the global commons, as they are called. And to that extent, India and Japan have been collaborating, especially in the context of the Malabar naval exercises, in which India, Japan and the Navy of the US participate. And Australia wants to join this trilateral arrangement to make it a quadrilateral arrangement. But India so far has chosen to sidestep that issue altogether. But yes, when you talk about China, India, Japan relations assume a salience of their own. And but that said, China's statement was in particular reference to the high-speed rail corridor project, Aisha. Yes. And remember, Chinese companies are also interested in participating in similar projects elsewhere in the country. Remember, India is using the Ahmedabad-Mumbai high-speed rail corridor as a template for replicating it to connect other cities, namely Delhi, Kolkata or Chennai. So clearly, there is immense scope for other countries, other companies, especially from China, to collaborate in this venture, and therefore, to that extent, it should be seen as more conciliatory than anything else.